I recently read a birth story that was prefaced by the question, when does a birth story begin? At the first contraction, at the child's conception, or in the mother's childhood? With that in mind, I will begin my firstborn's birth story by saying that it began long before I conceived, when I first became interested in home birth. It was not long after that I became a birth doula, so my birth experiences are tainted in a good way by my experiences attending other women's births. I knew long before my son was born that I would be planning a home birth, and when I became pregnant, I set up an appointment with a midwife I have worked with and am greatly fond of. My pregnancy progressed normally, and I enjoyed watching my belly grow and hearing his heartbeat and feeling his kicks, and at the same time looking forward to the day when I would no longer have heartburn or be watching the arrow on my scale climb higher and higher. Well, anyway, 5 weeks before my due date, my midwifery team came to my home to do a prenatal. I remember feeling a bit pressed to tidy up the house and to get it all over with before a certain time when we had to leave for my husband's worship practice at church, which ended up being a surprise baby shower. So when my normally low blood pressure read well above my highest record, it was no surprise. Yet since I was in the time frame at risk for preeclampsia, that's what my midwives first suspected. It turned out that I only had gestational hypertension, but the next few weeks were very stressful, and as a doula I knew what was at stake. I followed all the midwife's orders, but every time I went to a prenatal my blood pressure climbed from slightly high at home to very high at the office. Eventually I decided to choose Bridgeton Hospital with the Blue Moon Midwives team and transferred all my care to them. That was very humbling to me, and I shed more than a few tears over my seemingly lost dream. And though my new midwives were not as concerned, I had had enough of the pressure and induced myself with castor oil on the morning of my due date, October 19, 2006. Within a couple hours I was experiencing painless but regular contractions. Later in the afternoon, my husband came home from work and I excitedly told him what was happening. The contractions got to be a bit stronger, some even being uncomfortable at the peaks, and about 5 to 7 minutes apart, so later in the evening we traveled the 40 minutes to our hospital's town to stay at a friend's house until things picked up. But of course, as soon as we arrived, the contractions petered out and I had a sleepless night, expecting things to pick up, but they didn't. The next morning we went home, and over the course of the day I took a few small doses of black and blue cohosh and another dose of castor oil. I was still having contractions, but they were not all that strong. I should have realized my body wasn't ready, and did all the stuff I tell my clients, but I hadn't walked in their shoes yet. I got a short nap that morning of the 20th, and that night I seemed to sleep pretty well, of course being discouraged in the morning that I was still only having unproductive contractions. I should also say that I taught my husband how to check my dilation, and by Saturday morning I was still only about 2 centimeters. So my mom, a licensed massage therapist, came up and did some massage and acupressure on my hands and feet, and I immediately noticed a difference. We walked to the library because they were having a sale on old books, and I bought a $1 bagful to read during my long hours of nursing on the couch that I would soon be doing. By evening, contractions were stronger and probably 5 minutes apart. My cervix was closer to 3 centimeters. My mom went home to rest up, and we all assumed I would be having the baby that night. Wrong. After a sleepless, long, lonely night, I was very tired the next morning. My aunt, who had her first baby by cesarean because she had 3 days of labor, called to give me a pep talk, and then my nurse midwife came to my home to assess how the baby and I were doing. She was very impressed with Glenn's newfound skill of dilation estimation, now at just over 3 centimeters, and recommended I take a sedative to get some sleep. Thanks to NyQuil, I had a wonderful, deep 2-hour nap and woke to regular, strong contractions. We whittled away the afternoon while I closed my eyes and breathed through contractions, and my in-laws brought us Italians for supper. I remember feeling very frustrated because I could only eat a bite every now and then, and because the contractions kept coming and I couldn't seem to eat during them. We went for a walk to the end of the street, and after they left, I took another NyQuil and lay down to take a rest, but this time it wasn't working. I felt so tired, and I really wanted some change, so I called to Glenn and he came to the bedroom where I was. He checked my cervix, and lo and behold, I was almost 4 centimeters, the bulging bag of waters. I told Glenn that I wanted to go to the hospital to either make my labor speed up or to get something to make me sleep because I couldn't take any more of this slow labor. So at approximately 9 p.m. we arrived at the hospital. It might have been a little later than that. When we first arrived, it was at the emergency door since it was after hours, and seeing a large pregnant lady walk through the door made a couple of heads turn. but I felt so out of place as I climbed onto the bed. I felt like it was all a joke and I shouldn't be there. I wasn't used to being the one on the birthing bed. My blood pressure was 160 over 100, heart attack level for me, and the nurse wanted to go get the doctor. But my midwife, God bless her, read that she legally had 1 hour to do whatever she wanted, and she put me in the bathtub. I had a lot of people praying for me and family in the waiting room praying too. After 30 or 40 minutes in the bath and having my blood drawn, my blood pressure was back down to something like 140 over 90, and it stayed lower than that for the rest of my labor. When they checked at that time, I was standing up, and Glenn was standing right behind me, holding me in his arms, and to lighten me up, he started talking about our redneck neighbors and their beat-up truck with its really loud muffler. I chuckled, and at that moment I really appreciated Glenn's calm support, my rock throughout my labor. After that was over, the next step was determining what to do since I was still 4 centimeters. I agreed to let the midwife break my water, and fortunately I started having some real good contractions after that. I sat on the ball leaning over the bed, sat on the birth stool in the shower, stood leaning over the bed, and got down on all fours leaning over the birth ball. My mom massaged my back, my home birth midwife gave me sips of water, and my hubby whispered in my ear. Oh baby, was my mantra. My midwife and nurse commented on how well I was handling my contractions, but when I got to transition it started to hurt and I wanted it over with. So I started talking Nubane. My midwife said that would mean having to lay down in bed because it can make you groggy, so I hesitated. But when the next contraction started to build up, I said, "Never mind, yes, I want it now." That must have been 3:30 or 4 a.m., and although I was still uncomfortable, I regained control and reestablished my ritual. But she was right. I had to keep my eyes closed because the half-dose of Nubane was making the room spin around me. It was quiet. I was lying on my side, covered by a hospital blanket, with an occasional person rubbing my back and offering a word of encouragement, but mostly I was trying to sleep between contractions. Around 4:45 a.m. I began feeling a strong desire to push. My mom said to wait so she could go get the midwife. I couldn't remember the midwife leaving the room, but I do remember saying that I couldn't wait any more, that I was pushing. So the midwife and nurse came back in, gave me the go-ahead, and I began pushing in earnest. But it was slow going. I didn't want the birth stool because I didn't feel strong enough, and the stool wasn't very comfortable anyway. So we tried a method that the midwife recommended, where I hold on to the middle of a sheet, and then one person on each side of the bed would hold on to the other end of the sheet, and I would put my feet on their hips and push with my feet and pull on the sheet, and that helped me to push quite a bit better. And my nurse friend tried holding my leg while I was on my side, and eventually I reached the ring of fire. Although my mind was fuzzy with fatigue and Nubane, I specifically remember thinking that I had to relax my vagina and push through the pain in order to get that baby out. So I did. And at 5:46 a.m. on October 23, 2006, with one hand by his head like Superman, my 8-pound, 2-ounce, 20.5-inch long baby boy came flying out of me, and I screamed. After pushing so hard for so long, it was such a relief that the energy came out of my mouth and I cried out as his body passed through me. It was amazing. And I felt amazing. Well, quite a bit tired too, but I knew something miraculous had just happened, and this mysterious person that I could only imagine about was actually in my arms. He cried for quite a while, but as soon as we bundled him up and gave him to his papa, he stopped crying. And after I had my breakfast, I was finally able to curl up with my baby and take a nice long nap.